Well, you witnessed the myriad of stairwells. We usually don't come up that way, but there you go. So as I mentioned downstairs, this is part of the 1983 addition. So the office complex, we're just above there now. So this is the library, or IMC, depending on how you want to, or what vernacular you want to use. So this space is one that we have used much differently over the years than when it was the high school 25 years ago. So if you were here at that time, there were tall stacks all the way through this space, and this open area here is about what was left for there to be instruction or interactive space. So one of the things that we've done over the years, as you can see, is cleared as much as we could out so that we can actually get multiple groups of students in here at one time. So it's not uncommon for there to be 3 different groups of kids or multiple teachers sharing this space so that they can access either additional technology or print materials or do some things in small group. Or we can do large presentations here in multiple spaces as well, and get up to 150 kids or so in here as well. So this is a space that's heavily trafficked, and definitely, I think, an example of what we would always want a school library to look like, no matter where it's located, which is the center of learning, as opposed to it being a space that kids visit just once in a while. As you can see, this is probably also a good example of some furniture that is easily movable. Everything can be reconfigured into large circles, small groups, 2s, 3s, 4s, all the way up. Everything can be collapsible to clear the space, so if you need a large carpet area, you're able to do that as well. But it's really been a good example for us of how, by actually removing some of what was structure inside the room, the space is so flexible that it's getting used much more than it had been in the past. So Matt, do you have anything you want to add there?
No, I agree 100%. It's nice too, we have a set of bean bags and stuff. Some of the kids really enjoy coming up here to present outside of the classroom so they can move things around, and the flexible seating is fantastic. It makes it really nice to be able to do different sized parent meetings or staff meetings and things like that.
So any questions here? Nick?
Got a question.
I figured it wasn't.
So I just wanted to point out, because as we go through the building, you'll see things that are a lot different than this space. And you just heard Robin and Matt talk about flexible seating and moving things around in the space and how removing bookshelves allow that to happen. So this is pretty typical of what we would see in new spaces today. And one of our biggest challenges in this building in particular is the size of some of our spaces and how teaching and learning utilizes space today and utilizes furniture like this. So when we get into some of the classrooms, try to picture this kind of arrangement and this kind of flexibility happening in some of those spaces. So that's kind of one of our key challenges with this building today. Question?
Yeah, what kind of technology would you be looking at introducing on this space?
Well, technology is an interesting question, right? Because it changes faster than you can build buildings.
Right, it needs to be adaptable.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the interesting things that we've seen happen over, say, the last decade or so, it used to be like when we were talking about building new schools, computer labs, we need labs. Well, now with Wi-Fi and one-to-one devices, the entire building is a computer lab. So it's more about building robust infrastructure to support those things, from power to the data cabling and networking for the wireless. That's really what we need. It's less about the devices and where they go, because those will change, right? Every 5 years, devices are almost, it's like your TV. Every 5 years, it's antique. So it's that infrastructure that's really critical.
I think that's a great question. And without getting into all the learning piece of it, the technology goes with kids more so than its space that they visit, which is a shift even in the last 5 or 7 years for us as well. So with that, we're going to head down. So we're on 2nd floor, just so you know, and we're not going to head up to 3rd floor. So a lot of what we would see there is similar here. We do have a couple of science labs there that when it was the existing high school that had the actual gas, which we removed before we brought middle school kids here. And like giant electrical boxes, like Some of you probably remember those, but those are now gone. But so what you'll see heading down this hallway is a social studies class on the right, and then we'll see a series of different English classrooms moving down as well. So as you're working through, just sort of looking into some of those classrooms, Matt, if you want to pick one, we'll put everybody in there. I guess I would just ask that you pay attention to the size of the space, how that teacher is using that space, whether desks and tables and things are in rows, or if they're in small groups, or if there's the ability to move that furniture around. So our class sizes at the middle school are often in the 20s, and so if you can just sort of picture, similar sizes that we are, only with middle school age kids in those spaces as well. So we'll just sort of pause along the way, and if you have questions, please grab people and ask, or let us know what you'd like to know more about.
Classrooms, how many kids are in each room?
Mid-20s approximately.
Okay.
Does this need to watch it?
Yep, those ones right out to the back. Those fields over here, back parking lot right there. One thing that's nice, we do have a large gym area here, a large gymnasium with a smaller gymnasium off to the side. It does get used often by the public, which you can hear some basketball going on right now. There's sign up literally every night, just about every weekend. There's sign up for basketball, wrestling, soccer teams are up here. It gets used all the time. We always have community members in here outside of our hours. That's after our students have their sports and things that they sign up for. Rob, did you want to say anything else about this area?
No, I know one of the things that we've been really transparent about as well is the amount of community use all of our buildings receive, and the middle school is no different. The gym or field house space is not something a typical middle school would have, and we've definitely taken advantage of it programmatically. But it is, as Matt said, both the middle school and high school, as well as the elementaries, are you should see people trying to find space. It's about booking well in advance. So these aren't plants here tonight. They just happen to be having gym space available. But and I just added, so one of the things that we've worked hard on is not just with fire codes and things, but we've had issues with being able to lock down sections of the building. So when we have groups in on the weekend, it used to be where they could actually get all the way through into classrooms, or they could get into lockers, or they could get into places that weren't great. So we've done a lot of work over the years in trying to do those types of things. The other thing I would mention is, I don't think we plan on going all the way down. There are two sets of bathrooms here, and both of them are two-person bathrooms. So one is at the far end of this hallway, and then the other is at the far end of that hallway. So this is an academic floor for the most part. Our art classrooms are here, but in any given class period, we have around 250 kids on this floor. So bathroom facilities and stairwells are a significant issue. And I think that sounds silly perhaps when we talk stairwells, but I've always said if we ever build a new school, I'm gonna have the world's biggest stairways, because more stuff happens there than I think anywhere else. But anyway, so just give that some thought as you're going through. Again, I think wherever you look, you'll see that we've been taking good care of things. The gym is certainly one of those facilities as well. So Josh, you were gonna?
I was just gonna attest to how much activity we have within the gym. We usually need about a week or two to resurface our gym floors every year, and it's usually a challenge between me and Matt to find the scheduling for it, just because of how much the space is used. Obviously, in a more modern school, we don't typically build storage for gym in the same space that we have, water heaters and expansion tanks. I just wanted to point out that we, over the years, have tried to update and implement some of our utilities. We did have 2 water heaters that were your classic big tanks that were in here at one point. Just life cycle, they started to have issues just like you have your utilities, and obviously your heaters, your water heaters, the things that you have in your home after 15, 20 years or so. A lot of times you start to see some wear and tear. So we did install 2 years ago these on-demand water heaters. It's been a huge utility savings. They're great. It's so much better than what we had in here. We had lots of leaks in here at one point. And then we still have the original expansion tank that was, I believe in the 50s, this one was installed. It was rewrapped in the 80s, and then these two were installed, I believe, the same time that we put geothermal into the school, which would have been in 2007, 2008. Does anyone have any questions about geothermal at all? And how that works with this school?
I wasn't aware that this school had geothermal. I know they put it in with the other ones.
Yeah, so the high school and Luther are the only two that don't have geothermal. All the rest we do. It's a glycol system. It's basically these big tanks, and we might go into another mechanical room where we actually have a glycol tank. But it feeds the glycol into the ground. The groundwater is so far down at a certain temperature. So in the winter we use it to warmer, so we use that to help heat the building, help compensate, and obviously on utility costs. And then vice versa in the summer, when we pull it up, it helps cool the building down because it's obviously cooler than the outside air temperature. But for a geothermal system to work, you have to have heat pumps everywhere that pump through the circuits that are out in our field, which is where the track is. And those heat pumps, they last about 15, 20 years, and some of those heat pumps aren't even 15 years old, and a lot of them have had to be replaced already. So they are. Originally, when I first arrived in 2018, they were between like 4,000 and 5,000, and within the last year, they've been closer to 7,000 or 8,000. So they definitely have gone up as inflation has gone up. And then the lead times right now, as you folks I'm sure have seen with everything else in shipping, it's just been a little crazy. So when a heat pump goes down, we do everything we can with retro kits, and we utilize our in-town electrician and the folks that we have partnerships with that consult and come in and do fixes on geothermal systems. But a lot of times it gets a little tricky because not a lot of schools out there have that system.
Do you know what was the projection for when you thought you would start seeing savings with the geothermal? Because I know it costs more to put it in,
Right.
and then you start seeing savings
Sure.
in X number of years.
I know like the wind turbine is like 20 some years. That would be a
Yeah.
question for Jason. I know he's somewhere out there. He's our business director. I want to say it's something like 15 or 20 years. It was somewhere in there. So, and that was, a lot of it in this building was installed in 2007 or 2008. So I'm thinking by if I remember the last meeting we had about this, it was later this decade. It would be where we would break even and then start seeing. But obviously the utility payments that we pay every single month, we see those cost savings by having those implemented.
Sure.
So, but when you got to replace heat
Doesn't pay for
pumps,
itself yet.
right. But obviously when we have over 200, I think we have 257 heat pumps in the district total, and I would say on an average month 3 or 4 go down, and we have to, front the cost to replace those.
So would a new facility be looking, I know when it was put in, that was kind of like the big way to
Sure.
do cost savings and.
Sure, yeah.
Would geothermal be thought about again, or is
Probably
it not?
not, because the high school is not. If that's kind of the location they're thinking of, if obviously this all were to pass, where they would build that new building, and we don't have any geo loops or any in that field at the high school, and that the location of where that building was built used to be kind of, I don't want to call it a wetlands, but it was a little bit more swampy many years ago. So I don't think, just because of that, and then also the core samples when they built that building, for whatever reason, they determined it wasn't a good location for geothermal.
Our learning spaces here, again, we have English classrooms. That seems to be a theme tonight. This is the Family and Consumer Ed, or home ec, depending on your age. We're currently not offering that as a middle school program, but it is space that continues to be used. So you can see there, probably very similar to when you were here as a student as well. But again, some learning spaces. Am I right, Kevin, that this was originally the office complex or something?
Office complex was on the left-hand side.
Yeah, so if you like to reminisce, that's what this space was.
And
And
I spent most of my time with the principal.
yeah.
We would
Back
we
then,
would
right?
discuss
Okay.
my academics.
But again, I think you can see, we have some variance in square footage and some variance in how we can meet with students in these different spaces. And then we'll continue on down and we'll work our way. Just off to the left is a pod of 4 classrooms. So that doorway is back into the 1983 edition. So you'll see that there's a pod of 4 classrooms with walls that are able to be opened. When we talk about flexible learning spaces, that's actually what we're talking about there. So this is primarily 6th grade down there, or down here, but you'll be able to at least see what that would look like in a space that can be used in a multiple or a variety of different ways. So anything else anybody wants to hit before we start walking again?
Maybe just one more comment, because I'm the architect, I like to point these things out. If we think about what happens in schools today, there's much greater variety, right, on a day-to-day basis on what probably happened when these spaces were built. So when you think about like small groups, whether it's interventionists or even student work, and how and where you do that within the building, if you stand in this space right now, you really can't see from space to space to space. So if you think about being an instructor in the building and you're going to send a small group of students somewhere to work, that's a little bit of a daunting challenge, right? You can't see your students. So that's sort of a relic of buildings like this that were built for a different way of delivering instruction. So when we see modern buildings, we see increased visibility and thoughts about sight lines and how you can create a greater variety of learning opportunities within the building. So.
Hey Rob, how many students did you say are in the classrooms again?
We're running, in the core areas, probably in the mid-20s.
So I just give an example. There's a couple rooms that are just behind Rob. On my plan, they're labeled as English. There might be something else this year, but there are some of the smaller rooms and that we'll see in the building, as well as when we go around the corner to the pod that Rob was talking about, our smallest math classrooms within the structure as well. Typically now for a new construction, for students, we're planning for 32 square feet is kind of the ideal average for amount of square feet per that student. So if you took that same equation and assigned it to these existing spaces, we'd get a classroom that was able to teach in a flexible learning environment, 22 students and 24. So you can begin to further reinforce the constraints that the existing classrooms are putting on teaching and learning. And then also, if anybody wants a little more piece of history, as we walk through these doors, we're actually going to go by an original wall of the 1911 building. So there's a very small sliver, but about 3 stories tall, of the 1911 building that needed to remain in order to build the additions onto that structure and then take it down and build another addition to the north.
So when we first moved into this building as a middle school, that wall was also air conditioning versus no air conditioning. So there was a huge hierarchy of teachers as we were moving in as to where people landed. So then eventually with the geothermal project, then this was come online. And there were some stories here about our 8th grade promotion is very, very well attended in the gym. And the first year we had, decent HVAC. That was certainly a huge difference. The other thing just you made me think of, one of the things middle schools I think are, we always hear about are the struggles that middle school age kids have and what schools look like and how things feel for kids. One of the things that we've always tried to work on, and I know Matt continues to, is limiting the amount of travel kids need to do from one class to the next. And it's just frankly very, very difficult. So over the many years we've been here, we've been more grade level, we've been more departmentalized. We're constantly trying to shift around. So how is it we can keep 6th graders primarily with 6th graders throughout the day, which is really the biggest sort of group of concern for parents especially. And then how is it that we can keep 7th and 8th graders or each group separate from one another? So as you can see, we have stairwells that are shared by all 3 grade levels out of necessity, and then we have kids on multiple floors. So while it's not, believe me, we don't try to make it happen, it's possible in some cases for 8th graders to be on 3rd floor, down on the far end of ground floor for perhaps a tech class, and then back up on 3rd floor. So I'm not sure we have tons of sympathy for 8th graders, but it does. And we have 4-minute passing time in this building, or at least I used to.
Yeah.
So they hustle, but...
And the thing is too, not only that, do they have a long ways to travel, that we talked about the bathroom sizes and some of the small bathrooms, so we have students who have to get to opposite ends of the building, and then they have to wait in the bathroom. I mean, they're losing instructional time for all that extra traveling and waiting, really.
And then the last thing I would just add to that is the issue of supervision and how is it that we have adult eyes on kids and where are kids. And when they're in 4 different stairwells and moving between floors, it's just constantly a lot of movement of kids. And when we hear about whatever we hear about in social media that may or may not be true, a lot of that does come down to, do we see kids? Do we know where kids are? And do we know how kids are working with one another? So just sort of keep those things in mind. And none of that is about sales. That's just about the practicality of what contemporary middle school looks like and how it functions. So again, this was FCE. This next room, this was the sewing room if you grew up here. This is an English classroom. And then we'll sort of regroup down past that door after people get into some classrooms.
These are individual heat pumps right here, and in fact, the one that's on the top was replaced 4 years after they installed the system because of manufacturer issues that were inside of them. You can see an old one on, they covered it up. There's one on the ground, and you can see the inside. There's all kinds of boards and wires, and obviously you have the compressor, you have Freon, there's the glycol exchange that runs through these pipes, and then we have pumps that, big booster pumps that obviously bring it out of the field outside into the system, and then it goes to the individual sections of the building.
It's kind of a dumb question, but what part of the pump fails? Is it consistently the same part that fails now?
We get a lot of control issues, which is obviously tied into our building automation system. This is actually our brain of the building here between these two. A lot of times it's the compressors inside. We get all kinds of glycol issues with the pumps inside. Sometimes it's just an electrical issue. Especially when we have big storms, a lot of times we'll get surges, and there's all kinds of stuff in place to protect those things, but we still sometimes get electrical issues with them. And I just know from the beginning, the ones that were installed from the get-go, 3 or 4 years later, we had to install. They look very similar, but this one was 4 years newer because it was the same model as this and had the same issues. So some of that stuff was covered under warranty at the time because it was so new. But now we're at a point when these things pop up. We have retrofit kits to fix them. We have wire harnesses that we can replace. So we usually do our due diligence to see what we can and fix before we're just going to do a full replacement.
One of the things that we've appreciated is working with the city in the hope of having some new housing opportunities on the other side of town. So 2 new subdivisions that are now annexed into the city. So part of what we're trying to do is position physically, but also position for when more housing is available. As you know, that's been the biggest limiting factor for people trying to get into Fort Atkinson. So, but yeah, I mean, so we've been really clear with enrollment numbers. We've been on the decline, like everyone that you're hearing about in the news. We're expecting, we have a couple of small groups at the elementaries now, and when they get to the middle school, it will be smaller. One of the things that I think with any new building project is you're building for that capacity to ebb and flow a little bit. So we have an awful lot of square footage here. We would never need to replicate that amount of square footage in a building where it's more efficiently built. So those are the things we would be looking for, where that building can sort of ebb and flow based on what student populations are. So
this building has a lot of things that were here at the high school.
Yeah.
Would you not have some of those things in a new building?
So one of the areas that if we have time we can walk through is, we would probably never build a music wing like we have here. So we have really some music facilities that are high school scale by size and dimension. Music is an important part of what we do here in Fort Atkinson, among many other things. So obviously we'd be looking to continue to sustain and grow those programs, but the space would look different than it does now. And there would probably be greater common use spaces between those programs as well, as opposed to them always being completely distinct entities, sort of on their own as it is now. The other thing that I think, Matt, as the middle school principal, we're looking at, are we looking at a new schedule here? Are we looking at changing program? Are we looking at streamlining? Are we looking at, how is it that wherever we land that we're able to have space that adapts to, what we're wanting to do there as well, so.
Would you be looking at building a pool at a middle school?
Yeah, so we would not be looking at replacing the pool. So the pool is beyond the shower room where most of you just were. Just not a pleasant place for, we never required showers while I was here, but so the pool is scheduled to come offline in the next couple of weeks now. If you watch the board presentation, great. If not, I would suggest you go back and take a look. It's just cost prohibitive for us to keep it up at this point in maintenance point of view, but also from a safety point of view. So we would be looking at, obviously, the high school pool remaining. If we were to be able to build in that site, then we'd be looking at what type of shared space or what type of space would we have to augment, in balance community need, because that's another area. And then, the school's needs as well. We have a kitchen complex here. We do have some ability to do some cooking here. It's mainly used as a service kitchen. Definitely an area that our current nutrition director is looking to expand in all of our buildings is more of a from scratch cooking setup for our nutrition systems. So the other thing, I guess, while we're just here, I'll mention. So when we talk about secure entrances, one of the things that we're asking people to think about is the concept of a new middle school, but then also secure entrances at all of the elementary schools as well as the high school. So as you think about when you came in this evening, we do have an A phone, so people need to get buzzered in, and the building is all locked down. But as you look at it, like if you're going by door numbers, we have a huge number of exterior doors in this building, which remain locked, but can certainly be accessed definitely from the inside out. You sort of start getting the idea. And we have a very robust security camera system for that reason as well. But as you're coming in, in a newer setup, you would be buzzed into a vestibule area, and then you would be checking in directly with someone from the office or working through another entrance, so that if there was a problem, that problem is contained right there. So as you think about when you come in, if you take a hard right, there's a large group room, or what used to be like the study hall room, like those stairs go all the way up to the 3rd floor, and so you end up with direct access to the whole building. So no fear mongering there, but when we talk about secured entrance, we're talking about literally needing to buzz in and being checked in a couple of different spaces so that we know exactly who's coming in, who they are, and then also having more limited places for people to be able to get into the building from the outside as well, focusing everyone into that main entrance. Yeah.
So for building, on that subject, a building that's this size, is code, what's code safe for the number of entrances or that you should have?
It's totally dependent on the configuration of the building, the number of people by calculation, not by actual people, and by travel distances within the building. So part of the reason this building has so many doors and stairs in it, it's kind of grown over time, right? It's actually multiple buildings. And every time you kind of change it, you have to reevaluate the code. So oftentimes that means you add another door, you add another stair. So that's another one of the benefits of starting over. We get to control all those variables and make it much more thoughtful, much more efficient in how people move, and we can control today's code.
Off that subject, other than the life cycle, things that the wear and tear items in this building, structurally, is there any structural issues with the building?
No, not building structure. That's very rare. Dan said.
Yeah, the pool has some issues, some structural issues with the underside of the concrete,
Yeah.
but yeah. Other than that, there's some cracking, there's some settling of the different additions. You'll see the cracks in the floors. Talking about that earlier, there's things like that that are occurring, but
it's very rare for an actual structural system to get to the point of danger.
So this is one of two, for lack of better words, tech ed shops. Depending on your vintage, it has different names. So the other is just down the hall, and then if you grew up here, the agricultural shop, as I recall, was across the hall. So when we moved into this building 25 years ago, part of that referendum, there was about $1 million that was spent to make this building a little bit more suitable for middle school aged kids. So one of the things we did with that, with the agricultural shop, was built 2 classrooms that are currently science and social studies for 6th grade. So this is, sort of a traditional shop setup. and this is still how we use that space as well as the other space. I grew up in one of these. My dad taught tech ed for 34 years, so this is like old home to me. In a more contemporary setting, it's more what's being called maker space, or it's more on the engineering side, and so that space really looks much different than it would here. So that's not to say that in a more contemporary program you're not still going to see some woods, you're not going to still see some construction, you're not going to see some of those traditional pieces, but there is more of a technology engineering side that is part of the middle school programming that we hope to continue to grow as well. That's a piece where we've made some advancement, but truly we've not probably made the steps that we're hoping to make in the future, at least not as of yet. This is definitely a high interest area for kids at the middle school, and definitely, especially as kids are looking at the trades at the high school, it's an important part of our program there as well. So we're really looking at how is it that we can work with middle school and high school, not necessarily always sharing space, but how is it that we can actually use logistics to bring program a little bit closer together. So if we have access to facility in one place or another that's easier to get people to and from, or even staff to or from, the ability to share things might be a little bit greater than they are now. And no, I'm not talking about sixth graders with seniors, but if you want to do a touch of welding with a middle school unit, you might be able to get some space that's across the parking lot as opposed to arranging to get them bused to the high school or whatever the case might be, or a similar example there. So any questions here? Yeah, go ahead.
This is a hypothetical one. I would imagine some people would say, why don't you tear down the oldest part of the building and build new, just like you did the last time?
Mm-hmm.
What would be your answer to that?
So I'll give one answer and then other people can chime in. One of the things in some of the different, some of the different options that the Facilities Advisory Committee looked at is how is it that you go about phasing, and where is it that you're able to operate school during that time of construction. So where is it, if you're removing a building and you have nowhere else to go with kids, that obviously presents a problem as well. So in some cases you've seen where they've kept an existing building and then built a building next to it on the same plot of land, which isn't real viable in this actual location, nor does it get us some of the logistical things that we're hoping to get, where parents can get in and out more easily, where we can get, as I was just saying, some of those things more in a region of town as opposed to being spread out as well. So theoretically, yes, it's possible. The difficulty is, where is it you go with kids in the couple of years that you're building and under construction? Does anybody else have a better answer than that?
I can help out a little bit, right? So we had the question about the structural system right here when we were just standing in the Commons, and then a little bit earlier, the gentleman over here asked, hey, these walls are pretty sound, right? And now how sound and solid they are is becoming a hindrance to how teaching and learning occurs, and the visibility that we've been talking about, and the expectations of that are needed today.
Yeah, one other piece to it. So when we're working with the Facility Advisory Committee, we did study some renovation schemes, right? How could we reuse this building? Like Devin said, sometimes the sturdiness of these buildings can actually hinder some of the transformations. And it's really not a question of so much of age of different portions of the building. It's really about the functionality of how this building works. And some of the things we saw tonight as you walk through, it's a little bit disjointed, right? Because this building's been built and built and built and built over years. And when we think about long-term value, yes, it is possible, to take down a piece of that and build something new, and that new piece will be great. But then, do we really get the most value for the dollars spent when we renovate? Because any renovation project has compromises. It just does. There are things that you just can't realistically change. So when you think about making a big investment, we want this to last for decades to come. The conclusion that our work with FAC was that starting fresh, where we control all those variables, really gives us the longest, best value for this large investment long term, rather than to continue to try to modify this building which was never a middle school to begin with. It's a high school.
And I think somebody else had a question about accessibility in this building. So we do have the one elevator that's just next to the office there. But one of the things that is a limiting factor here from time to time is trying to get kids around. And we are a public school, so we service all kids all the time. And so that may not be a primary reason, but as you've been working through the building, we've covered probably a quarter of the actual physical layout that kids travel on any given day. So that's an area that we would be looking for some improvement in as well. So go ahead.
If you decided to renovate this entire building, would the cost possibly be similar to what building a new building would be?
It's approaching 70% of what a new building would be.
Yeah. So when we get to numbers like that, it gives us pause, right? Like I said before, there are always compromises, and you're not going to get 100% of what you get in new construction. So that's kind of when you say, is that really a wise use of resources, or do we get more value by starting fresh?
Other questions for us tonight? Yeah.
So the thing I hear from a lot of people is sticking a middle school at the site by the high school, traffic is already horrible.
Mhm.
And what I tell them is if they're putting a subdivision up there and they're gonna build a middle school, there's gonna be rerouting and expansion of roads and stuff like
Yeah.
that, and access points and things like that.
So one of the nice opportunities we've had is that the city has involved us directly. Jason and I have been meeting with them regularly in the actual layout of those new subdivisions. So without getting into schematics and actual maps, Bark River Road, you got my Banker Road, thank you. I drive it every day. Is actually going to be rerouted some. There'll be another point of entrance into the backside of our property that direction. What we would need people to do is just sort of hold so that we could put all of the plans together, because it does come together. So we're looking at, would we potentially have another entrance on the athletic complex where actually more of our traffic would head in that direction, from that side of town. How is it that middle school is positioned in? Is there a shared drop-off main entrance, or is that actually an ancillary space that's connected? Are we able to work with MATC and potentially do something with that piece of green space that's there? So none of these things are set in stone, but those are all things that are currently being explored. Because if you look at that site, if we can edge a little bit here or there, that makes a big difference. So yeah, I think those are all very legitimate questions. But for us to have gotten to the point that we're at now, or to be trying to even move it forward, we would be silly to come back a year later and go dang. But I would also tell you is that none of our schools, aside from the high school, are set up for easy entrance, exit, or drop off or pickup, right? So I would never say anything would be an improvement, but anything would be an improvement. But it's been great when we're talking with the city, because the other thing the city has going now is their next big planning phase for the next decades out into the future. And if you look at the plans for the city, and what would potentially happen on that side of town, that location is central and probably has the best infrastructure in town to sustain this. So we have been really appreciative of working with them, because it's not an afterthought at all. So we've also been working with Madison College very closely, as I just mentioned. And then we're also looking at what type of community partnerships are on that side of town. Is there something with Fort Healthcare? Is there something with other goods and services that are there? Because what would be envisioning is more of a campus style approach, that you have suitable, beyond suitable, but quality learning environments for kids through really grades 6 through 14. Because what we would also be looking at is how is it we can continue to build relationships with Madison College, especially related to some of those trades areas. So Madison College, for instance, is pretty excited about some possibilities there, because you would have a section of town that is dedicated to all of those years of schooling. So I think there's some real opportunity for us to explore there. down the road as well. Other questions at this point? Yeah.
So if I read right, the plan would be, if everything went forward, would be to level this place.
So we're trying to be honest with people that this probably isn't a great building to repurpose in some way. That's something the board would need to grapple with. So we're not in a spot where somebody's going to come in and make condominiums necessarily, or that it's something that we have another purpose for. I just don't think there's a real answer. So we've been trying to be clear with people that it could include having the building come down. I would hate for there ever to be a perception that we promised that wouldn't be the case, and then that ended up being the case. So it's interesting. I just still find it fascinating when you look at the plot of this, the original plotting of the city in this area. This parcel of land was actually home sites, so you can still look through the plot map, which I find pretty fascinating when you think about like what has been here, or what the original plan for the city was as well.
So if this was torn,
No.
If this was torn down, then would the land be up for sale, or would the city still retain it?
So the school district owns it, and so that's what the board would need to figure out. So I don't think that all of that would be decided before we would ask a question of the community to support construction, but the land would stay with the district. So in addition to decisions about the physical structure, then the space would remain. So it would be sort of as versatile as possible for community use, I would say, until we know what is happening with it.
Rob, the whole SWEC site, how much of the land does the school district hold there?
I'm-
Do you own it all?
Of what?
Where the building is going to go?
So we own. Sorry. So we own. If you know where the electronic sign is, so we own that swath of land. Imagine that right up to the solar panels. And then METC owns the part sort of behind their parking lot. So that's sort of that sliver of land that I was talking about. And then obviously we own everything in front of the high school. So, and this is where it's hard to talk because none of this is truly planned out yet. So we're trying not to get people excited about hypotheticals, but you would actually potentially look at some road changes there where, you know, what is a section of Campus Drive may actually be gone so that we could afford that space to be dedicated to whatever the building campus might look like. But that would actually, traffic would then be rerouted in probably even more sensible ways to get people in and out of those areas.
But would we need to make a purchase of land?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, and that's one of our issues is there are not parcels of land to build. So, or that are, central at all to where kids and families can access them either by bike or by walking. Not that tons of kids do that, but that are more central to town. So again, if you look at like the city planning long term, and some of the names involved own all of the chunks of land around sides of town, and in our lifetime, I don't know that I see some of those families selling in those pieces of land either. So, but, and this is, and I guess I'll just double back and say, this is sort of the difficulty of where we are in this project, because you want to be able to answer people's questions and not have them feel like we're withholding anything, but at the same time, there needs to be a little bit of sustained, like these are things we're thinking about and we will have answers to eventually. So we're investing as much as we can with our other groups, PRA and CG Schmidt, and internally and with the community as well, and trying to figure out what are the questions, what are the big burning things that people want to know. It's not about just trying to sell something to get it through. It's about we want it to be a meaningful place for learning for kids, but we also want it to be a meaningful place for the community. The high school, and I think everyone would agree, is truly a community center as well as being a high school. And I mean, that's really what schools in a community our size are. And that's, I mean, what we would want to continue to see there as well.